So thank you everybody for coming, and thank you Chris and Gillian for having me today. And thank you of course for coming, not only my graduate trainee buddies, but also so many people from South Asian Studies. It's really a great pleasure to see you all, and all of the librarians and the rest. So I'm going to speak today very shortly about my experience of doing an internship with the Famous project, which is a large retro-cataloguing project that is hoping to kind of establish something like Solo, but for manuscripts and special collections in Oxford, which is just great. And I am doing a teeny tiny bit in that funded by the Bodleian Bodleian Scholarship, which I'm very, very grateful for. And Gillian has been very kind to facilitate for me that I can help retro-catalogue Sanskrit manuscripts under the guidance of Dr. Camillo Formigati, who is the curator of Sanskrit manuscripts. I don't know whether that is his official title still, but was at one point. And because I did my DPhil recently on Vedic literature, and it's something that Camillo is perhaps not that familiar with, we decided that I am going to catalogue the Vedic manuscripts in two collections, the Indian Institute Fund and in the Max Müller Memorial Fund collection. And so the three manuscripts that you see here are from a mix of these collections. Now, because not everybody here in the room is an Indologist, I thought I would say just a tiny bit about what the Rigveda is, because the manuscripts that we are seeing in front of us are the manuscripts of the Rigveda. So the Rigveda, as some of you will know, is the oldest Sanskrit text ever. It's dated to roughly 1500 to 1000 before Common Era, so fairly old. And it is composed in a very ancient form of Sanskrit language, very archaic form that we call Vedic. And it's a collection of about 1,000 poems, 1,028 hymns that are praising various gods and various ritual elements. And its aim, or why was it composed, was that it was hymns that were recited during a ritual performance. This doesn't mean that it is a dry ritual text or that it's just liturgical, but it's very finely crafted, literally composition, so to speak. And so these are examples of one really important thing that I should say, is that the Rigveda was fully composed orally, and it was transmitted orally for about 2,000 years. So we know from linguistical analysis that it is about 1,500 before Common Era to 1,000 before Common Era. That's its usual date range. But the first manuscripts that we find of it are from about 1,000 or 1,040 from Nepal of Common Era. So you can see that there is a massive gap, and in this gap, in this whole time, it was very likely transmitted purely orally from a teacher to a student, from father to son, and it's done like that until today. But at a certain point in India, and we don't really know why, it started being written down. And these are the examples of how it was written down. So all of these texts that you see in front of you are on paper. They are so-called Poti manuscripts. So unlike Western codices, they are long and quite wide. And here you can see all of them bound in Western style, but that only happened when they were admitted to the Bodleian. Before that, they would have loose leaf. They would be bound together just by a string. This first one is one of the oldest manuscripts of the Rigveda I actually know of. It's dated in its colophon to 1457. It has some of the leaves missing. You will see that the first leaf is actually in a modern hand, and then the second folio is the original one, fairly old. The oldest Vedic manuscripts we have, I said, are from about 11th century, but they are not even the manuscripts of the Rigveda. They're Vedic texts, there are other Vedic texts than the Rigveda, but this must be one of the oldest ones that at least in the Bodleian, and definitely altogether. This second one is also interesting. It's second volume of the full Rigveda, which is, as I said, 1,000 hymns. So it's really large text, and people memorized it, remember that, and transmitted it fully orally without any text in front of them. So this is from about 1750s, 1760s, written in Varanasi, in Benares, in northeastern India. And I don't really know why, but it's written in the same hand. This one is written for recitation, so somebody says it's a prop when you recite the Rigveda. This one in the colophon doesn't say why it was written. It doesn't give the reason, which is usually in the colophons. They would say why would they write it or for whom. But this, we know the name of the scribe, which I don't remember now. I think it's Narayana, but I'm not quite sure. And we know the place and the date, but we don't know why that said person wrote it, unfortunately. And then the last manuscript that you see here is an excerpt from the Rigveda from 19th century, written in a really lovely hand. It really should be taught to students to write Devanagari as pretty as this. And it's a really short selection. It's only 6 folios. It's bound with other manuscripts in the Bodleian Library. But it's 6 folios with excerpt from the Rigveda about women. And it was the very first manuscript I retro-catalogued for this project, so I have very, lots of emotions arise when I see it. So that's why I chose it. One last thing I would like to point out to you before I say just one last word about my cataloging is if you notice these 2 versions of the Rigveda, one of them, for those of you who are Indologists, it's going to be easy to spot, but one of them is so-called Samhita, which means that the text runs together. In Sanskrit, we usually write, in manuscripts at least, we write all of the words together without any breaks, and they kind of, it's not a technical term, they kind of mash together. We call that sandhi. There are rules of euphonic combination that connects words together and changes the sort of quality of the vowel. Whereas this one is so-called padapata, almost first linguistical or grammatical analysis ever done in the world, where the authors of the Rigveda at certain point, the transmitters of the Rigveda at certain point decided that they don't understand the archaic form of the language anymore, and so they had to divide carefully each word like we do it in Western writing. And so you will see when you look closely that words have breaks in between them. Whereas this one they don't, and this one they don't either. And then one last thing about the manuscript, when you look at them, all of them have really nice red markings. They're accents, so-called pitch accent, which is just a way how to recite it and in what tone and melody to say that in a nutshell. And then one last thing I would like to show to those of you who are librarians and will understand a bit more about it. So this is the cataloging I've been doing for the project in XML, in format also known as TEI, Text Encoding Initiative. And this is just a record of what the last manuscript actually is. So for people to find the manuscripts, we need to give them a guidance, kind of a map of what we have, right? And so we need to catalog what is in the library, and this is what I'm doing. Describe very carefully the data we know about the manuscript. So you will see, if those of you who will be interested will see that we record things like shelf marks, we record a short summary of what the manuscript is, how many folios it has, who is the author, what is the colophon or incipit of it, how to date it, how big is it, and where in the library they can find. And although this sounds like fairly basic job, you actually need quite a lot of training, not only to catalog it, but also to understand what a manuscript is in the first instance. So it's, one really does need a PhD for that, just to make a record of what we actually have in the library. And so, thanks to Gillian that I can actually do this and train in this very dark art of librarianship. That's all for me. with time to spare. Thank
Thank
you.
you.